My name is Nora Hart. I was 29 years old on the day I realized that a wedding can become a courtroom, a family can become evidence, and silence can be the loudest confession in the room. I was standing in a side corridor of the most expensive venue in Briar Falls, wearing an ivory dress my mother had steamed 3 times that morning, when I saw my father standing near the kitchen entrance with his hands folded in front of him like he was waiting for permission to exist. He had no seat at the family table. My mother had no seat beside him. The chairs meant for them had been taken by people who barely knew my name, but knew exactly how much my fiancé's family was worth. My parents had been moved to table 17, the table pressed against the service doors, under a buzzing ceiling light, close enough to the trash bins that every time the kitchen staff pushed through, the smell of dishwater and old coffee swept over the linens. Table 2, directly in front of the dance floor, was where both families were supposed to sit. That was the plan I approved. That was the chart I checked twice. That was where my father, Eli Hart, and my mother, Marlene Hart, belonged. Instead, 9 people from Adrian's family and their business circle were sitting there, laughing over champagne as if they had always owned not just the room, but the right to decide who mattered inside it. When I asked Adrian why, he said something so calm, so polished, so practiced, that for a moment I thought I had misheard him. Then I heard him repeat it behind a half-open door to his mother, and every excuse I had made for 2 years shattered at once. I stood there in my wedding dress, with 180 guests waiting for the reception to begin, and I made a decision that changed the rest of my life. I walked away before I ever signed the marriage license. What happened in that room, what my fiancé admitted, what his family lost afterward, and how I rebuilt my life from the ashes of a wedding dinner my parents helped pay for, that is the story I'm about to tell you. I grew up in Briar Falls, Pennsylvania, in a white clapboard house with a narrow porch and a maple tree that dropped red leaves all over the driveway every October. My father was a maintenance mechanic for the city transit garage for 34 years. He fixed buses before sunrise, came home with grease in the cracks of his hands, and could diagnose an engine problem by the sound it made turning a corner. My mother worked in the public school cafeteria, hairnet, apron, orthopedic shoes, and the kind of heart that noticed which children asked for seconds because they liked the food, and which children asked because they had not eaten breakfast. We were never poor in the way people say it with pity, but we were not rich in any way that impressed a country club. We had coupons in the kitchen drawer, 1 bathroom for 3 people, and a laundry machine that sounded like it was trying to escape during the spin cycle. My father wore the same winter coat for 12 years. My mother cut my bangs at the kitchen table until I was 14. But every bill got paid, every birthday had a cake, every school project had poster board, and when I walked across the stage to receive my nursing degree, my father cried so hard he pretended he had allergies. I became a pediatric nurse at a community clinic because I knew what it meant for people to need help without being able to afford dignity. My parents gave me that. They gave me a spine before I knew I would need it. I met Adrian Bellamy on a rainy Thursday afternoon when he brought his grandmother into the clinic for a blood pressure check. He was handsome in a way that made people turn their heads before they realized they were doing it. Dark blonde hair, clean suit, expensive watch, perfect manners. He thanked the receptionist by name after reading it off her badge and held the door for 3 patients before leaving. 2 days later, flowers arrived at the clinic with a card asking whether I would let him take me to dinner. I should have been cautious. Men like Adrian did not usually appear in my world unless they needed something repaired, cleaned, catered, or treated. But he was warm, attentive, funny in a quiet way. He asked about my work and seemed to listen. He remembered that I hated olives and loved old bookstores. He drove 40 minutes in the snow to bring me soup when I had bronchitis. On our fourth date, he said he admired how close I was to my parents. On our ninth, he told me he wanted a family like mine because his had always felt more like a board meeting than a home. I believed him because I wanted to. Love is not always blind. Sometimes it sees the warning signs and files them under temporary. The Bellamys were old money by Briar Falls standards, which meant they were not billionaires, but everyone in town knew their name. Bellamy Properties owned half the new developments outside the city, including the shopping plaza with the yoga studio, the dental office, and the cafe where a cup of tea cost more than my father's lunch. Adrian's father, Graham Bellamy, chaired the company. His mother, Celeste, chaired everything else. Charity auctions, historical society luncheons, hospital benefits, private school committees. Celeste was the kind of woman who could insult you while touching your arm as if she were offering comfort. She wore pale colors, pearls, and perfume that entered a room 5 seconds before she did. The first time I met her, she looked at my clinic badge still clipped to my purse and said, "How noble! I imagine that kind of work gives you perspective." Then she asked if my parents were still working people, as though that was a medical condition. Adrian squeezed my knee under the table and mouthed, "Ignore her." So I did. That was the beginning of the habit that nearly cost me myself. Celeste never openly declared war on me. She smiled. She hosted. She made suggestions that sounded like generosity until you looked closely and saw the hook. When Adrian proposed after 14 months, he did it in a private dining room at a restaurant where the Bellamys were investors. There were candles, white roses, a violinist, and Celeste sitting at a nearby table with 2 friends, pretending the timing was accidental. I said yes anyway. I looked at Adrian on one knee and told myself I was marrying him, not his mother. That is one of the most dangerous lies a person can tell before marrying into a family that has never heard the word no and considered it final. Wedding planning turned into a quiet negotiation for my identity. I wanted a small ceremony at the Methodist church where my parents had married. Celeste wanted the Briar Falls Heritage Club, with its marble entryway, chandeliered ballroom, and waiting list long enough to make people feel chosen. Adrian said, "Let her have the venue. It matters to her." I wanted simple centerpieces and music people could dance to. Celeste wanted peonies flown in from California and a string ensemble during dinner. Adrian said, "It's just one day." My mother offered to make her lemon sheet cake for the dessert table, the one everyone in our neighborhood requested for graduations and funerals. Celeste tilted her head and said, "That sounds very sweet, Marlene, but we have already contracted a pastry chef." My mother smiled and said, "Of course, no problem," but I saw her fold the recipe card back into her purse with hands that were suddenly too careful. Every time I objected, Adrian kissed my forehead and told me our marriage would be different from the wedding. "After this, it's you and me," he said. "Our home, our rules." I wanted to believe that the wedding was a performance and the marriage would be real. I did not understand that the performance was the audition. My parents contributed $10,000 to the wedding. They insisted. My father had been saving it in a separate account since I was in college, even though I begged him not to. "A father likes to help with his daughter's wedding," he said, as if the sentence were simple and not loaded with years of overtime, skipped vacations, and repaired appliances instead of replaced ones. That money covered the dinner deposit, the appetizers, the coffee service, and part of the dessert. Celeste accepted it with a thin smile and a note of thanks that mentioned your thoughtful participation instead of sacrifice. My father framed the receipt in his mind as pride. Celeste filed it as inconvenience. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and hot, the kind of June day that makes flowers open too quickly. I woke up in my childhood bedroom under the sloped ceiling with the glow-in-the-dark stars still faintly stuck above the window. My dress hung from the closet door, not a designer gown from Celeste's preferred boutique, but a simple ivory satin dress I bought myself because it made me feel like me. My mother stood behind me while I brushed my hair and kept saying, "You're beautiful," in a voice that sounded both joyful and afraid. My father knocked before entering, even though he had seen me in pajamas for 29 years. He wore a charcoal suit he had bought on sale after trying on 5 others and pretending not to look at the price tags. His tie was navy blue. His shoes were polished so carefully I could see the kitchen light in them. He handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was a silver locket that had belonged to my grandmother. "For courage," he said. I laughed and told him weddings did not require courage. By sunset, I would know how wrong I was. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful when you do not ask who paid for what or who was made smaller to keep the picture clean. The garden had white chairs, floral arches, and waiters passing cucumber water as if hydration had a dress code. My side of the guest list looked like my life. Nurses, teachers, neighbors, cousins, the woman who used to babysit me, my mother's cafeteria friends, my father's old garage crew. Adrian's side looked like a donor wall. Developers, lawyers, doctors, board members, people whose shoes made no sound when they crossed marble. I noticed before the ceremony that my guests had mostly been placed along the outer rows. I noticed that Celeste's friends occupied the center aisle. I noticed my parents were not escorted as prominently as Adrian's. But I was in a dress, holding flowers, being told to breathe, and everyone kept saying the day was moving too fast to worry about details, so I swallowed the discomfort. Again. We exchanged vows at noon. Adrian's hands were warm. His voice did not shake. When he said he would honor me, I believed him because the alternative would have required me to stop the ceremony in front of everyone I loved. Afterward, guests flowed toward the terrace for cocktails. The photographer asked for family portraits near the fountain, but Celeste interrupted twice to rearrange who stood where. My mother ended up near the edge of one photo, half hidden behind a tall cousin of Adrian's. My father laughed it off and said he was better behind the camera anyway. That was my father's gift and his curse. He could make himself smaller faster than anyone else in the room, not because he believed he deserved less, but because he never wanted me to suffer for demanding more. Before the reception began, I slipped into the ballroom to check the setup. It was a habit from nursing. Verify the chart, confirm the medication, count the instruments, trust nothing just because someone said it was handled. The ballroom looked perfect at first glance. Ivory linens, gold flatware, crystal glasses, tall arrangements, candlelight reflected in mirrors. 20 tables circled the dance floor. Table 2, the family table, sat just left of the sweetheart table, close to the stage. I walked over smiling, expecting to see my parents' names beside Graham and Celeste. Instead, the first card read, Victor Bellamy, then Elise Bellamy, then Mr. and Mrs. Aldridge, then Malcolm Bellamy, then Celeste's cousin, her cousin's husband, a judge, a donor, a woman from the foundation board. I kept turning cards over as if my parents' names might be hiding under the ink. They were not there. My chest tightened in a way I recognized from panic attacks in patients who swore they were just tired. I moved through the room, table by table. Table 5, Adrian's college friends. Table 7, Bellamy executives. Table 9, Celeste's charity circle. Table 12, my cousins and 2 of my coworkers. I found my parents at table 17. It was the last full table in the ballroom, positioned where the carpet changed texture near the service corridor. The chairs did not match the others. The centerpiece was smaller. One of the place settings was missing a butter knife. Behind the table, a gray trash bin stood partly hidden by a screen that hid nothing. The kitchen doors swung open and closed every few seconds, releasing heat, metal clatter, and the sharp smell of onions. There were my parents' names in gold script, elegant and cruel: Eli Hart, Marlene Hart. 2 names treated like an afterthought at the wedding of their only child. I found the coordinator, a woman named Patris who had been hired by Celeste and smiled like she was paid per tooth. I asked who changed the seating plan. She blinked once and said, "Mrs. Bellamy made some last-minute adjustments. I was told you had approved them." I told her I had approved no such thing. Her smile weakened, but not enough to become honesty. "I'm so sorry," she said. At this point, moving guests could create confusion. Confusion. As if confusion were the problem. As if the problem were not contempt printed in gold ink and placed beside a trash bin. I stood in the middle of that ballroom and saw the next 40 years unfold with horrible clarity. If I allowed my parents to sit there, Celeste would learn exactly where the line was, wherever she decided to move it. Christmas dinners would have a children's table for my family. Birthdays would have invitation errors. Photos would crop them out. My future children would learn that one set of grandparents belonged in front and the other near the service door. It was not a seating mistake. It was a map of the life I was about to enter. I went to find Adrian because a stubborn part of me still believed love would stand up when summoned. He was in the groom's lounge, standing before a mirror, adjusting cufflinks engraved with his initials. His best man was pouring whiskey into 2 crystal tumblers, and Adrian looked relaxed, almost bored. I asked, "Why were my parents moved from the family table?" He did not turn around. He watched my reflection instead of my face and said, "Mom had to rebalance a few tables." Rebalance. I repeated the word because it sounded so absurd. He sighed and finally faced me. "Nora, please, not now." I told him they were seated by the kitchen doors. I told him their chairs did not match. I told him there was a trash bin behind them. He rubbed his forehead like I was giving him a migraine instead of showing him a betrayal. "It's one dinner," he said. "Your parents won't care. They're easygoing." I stared at him, waiting for the sentence to embarrass him. It did not. "They are not easygoing," I said. "They are gracious. There is a difference." Adrian stepped closer and lowered his voice. "My mother is trying to manage optics. The Aldridges are important to Dad's new project. Judge Whitcomb is at that table. There are relationships involved." I asked if those relationships were more important than my parents. He said, "Don't make it sound ugly." That was the moment my hope first cracked. Not broke, not yet, but cracked enough for the cold to get in. He knew. Maybe he had not moved the cards himself, but he knew and had accepted it. He put his hands on my shoulders and told me we would fix it later. Later had been his favorite word for months. Later, we would set boundaries. Later, he would talk to his mother. Later, he would make it clear I was his priority. Later was where courage went to die. I left the groom's lounge before I said something I could not pull back. In the hallway, I found a stack of programs on the welcome table. The cover had our names in gold, Nora and Adrian. Inside was a page titled, "With gratitude to our families." In the proof I approved, the first line thanked Eli and Marlene Hart for teaching me what love looked like when it worked hard and asked for nothing. I had written it myself. In the printed version, my parents were gone. The Bellamys were listed first, then the Bellamy Foundation, then Adrian's grandparents, then all those who helped shape this day. My parents were not named anywhere. They had been removed from the table and from the story. I found my maid of honor, Lee, in the bridal suite. Lee and I had been roommates in nursing school before she switched to law, which made her the rare friend who could bandage your foot and draft a cease and desist with equal confidence. She saw my face and closed the lipstick she had been holding. "Tell me," she said. I told her everything. The table, the programs, Adrian's explanation. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the reasons I loved her. When I finished, she asked, "What do you want to do?" I said I did not know. She nodded and said, "Then we find the next true thing." That was Lee. No panic, no performance, just clarity. She reminded me that the ceremony did not make the marriage legally complete by itself. The license was supposed to be signed during dessert as part of Celeste's idea of a romantic public moment. Until I signed it, there was no filed marriage, no divorce, no annulment, no legal knot. "You still have a door," Lee said. "Decide before they put a pen in your hand in front of everyone." I walked toward the ballroom again, but as I passed the groom's lounge, I heard Celeste's voice through the half-open door. I stopped. I was not trying to spy. I was trying to breathe. Then I heard my father's name. Celeste said, "Adrian, be realistic. Her father looks like he came from a union meeting, and her mother's dress is obviously homemade. I will not have them placed beside Graham when the Aldridges are here." Adrian muttered something too low for me to catch. Celeste continued, sharper now. "This family has spent decades building a certain reputation. We cannot pretend a bus mechanic and a cafeteria woman belong at the center of the room." A pause. Then Adrian said, "I know, they'll be fine where they are. Nora is emotional, but she'll calm down." I pressed my palm against the wall. The hallway seemed to narrow. Celeste said, "You should have listened to me before proposing. She is a sweet girl, but she is not our level." And Adrian, the man who had said vows to me less than 2 hours earlier, did not defend me. He did not defend my parents. He said, "Just get through tonight." People imagine heartbreak as loud, but mine went silent. Something inside me stopped negotiating. I pushed the door open. Celeste turned first, and for half a second her face showed the naked irritation of a woman caught handling something she considered beneath her. Then the smile returned. "Nora, darling," she said, "you should be resting." I said, "I heard you." Adrian's face drained. Celeste lifted one hand as if calming a child. "You heard stress. Weddings create stress." I repeated her words back to her. "Bus mechanic, cafeteria woman, not our level." Adrian looked at the floor. That hurt more than denial would have. At least denial would have been an effort. I asked him, "Do you agree with her?" He said, "This is not the time." I said, "That is an answer." Celeste's tone hardened. "Do not be dramatic. Your parents are seated comfortably." I laughed once, and it did not sound like me. "They are seated near garbage because you think that is where working people belong." Adrian reached for my hand. I moved it away. He whispered, "Please don't ruin this." I looked at him and finally understood that to him, ruining the wedding meant exposing the cruelty, not committing it. I went to table 17. My parents were already seated. My father sat straight, jacket buttoned, hands resting on his knees. My mother was smoothing the skirt of the lavender dress she had altered herself. She had added soft lace to the sleeves because she wanted to look elegant without spending money she thought I might need later. The kitchen doors banged open behind them, and she flinched so slightly most people would not have noticed. I noticed. My father saw me and smiled. "There's my girl," he said. "You look like sunshine." I nearly broke then. I apologized, but he shook his head before I could finish. "No," he said softly. "You don't apologize for someone else's manners." My mother reached for my fingers. "We can sit anywhere, honey. Don't let this spoil your day." That was what undid me. Not anger, not humiliation. Their willingness to absorb the insult so I would not suffer the consequence. They had spent my whole life protecting me from storms. And here they were, sitting in one I had led them into, trying to convince me they were dry. The ballroom filled. The Bellamy guests took the best tables with the ease of people who had never searched for their names in the back. My side drifted toward the edges, confused but polite, because good people often mistake politeness for peace until someone weaponizes it against them. The MC, Adrian's cousin Nolan, tapped the microphone and welcomed everyone. He introduced the Bellamy family at table 2. Applause rose, bright and obedient. Celeste inclined her head like a queen accepting tribute. Nolan glanced down at his card, hesitated, then moved on without introducing my parents at all. My mother looked at her lap. My father stared at the water glass in front of him. At that moment, I saw Nurse Rachel from my clinic walk past table 17 with a plate of appetizers. She stopped, took in the service doors, the mismatched chairs, the trash screen, then looked across the room at me. Her expression changed from confusion to fury. People were noticing. The truth had begun leaking through Celeste's expensive fabric. Dinner service started. The first course was roasted tomato soup in shallow porcelain bowls, garnished with basil oil and tiny croutons. My parents, $10,000, dressed up and served to people who believed they were above the hands that paid for it. Celeste walked past table 17 with one of her friends, a woman named Blythe who had spent the cocktail hour telling people about her lake house. My mother was trying to fix a loose thread on her sleeve. Celeste looked down, smiled, and said just loudly enough to travel, "Some people are brave with a sewing machine." Blythe laughed behind her glass. Then Celeste added, "Still, one would think the mother of the bride might have found something suitable." My mother's fingers froze. My father reached under the table and took her hand. He did not rise. He did not shout. He simply held her hand, and that quiet dignity broke my heart more than any outburst could have. I had seen frightened children in exam rooms, exhausted mothers, fathers trying not to cry over bills. I had seen pain. But seeing my father sit beside a trash bin in his only good suit, while my mother swallowed shame she did not earn, was the worst thing I had ever witnessed. I found Adrian near the bar and pulled him behind a marble column. I told him what his mother had said. He closed his eyes, not in horror, but in irritation. "She shouldn't have said that," he murmured. I waited. He did not move. I said, "Go make her apologize." He looked over my shoulder at the ballroom, at the guests, at the investors, at the photographer, at his mother standing in the center of it all with champagne in her hand. "Not here," he said. I told him there would never be a better place to correct a public insult than where it happened. He lowered his voice. "Your parents are strong people. They can handle one uncomfortable evening." There it was, the final sentence. The one that told me he understood the harm and had decided my parents were sturdy enough to carry it for him. I asked, "And what am I supposed to handle?" He said, "Being married means choosing peace sometimes." I stepped back. "No, Adrian. Being married means not calling cowardice peace." He walked away first. That is important. He walked away and sat beside his mother. I stood behind that column, listening to silverware touch porcelain, and felt my future split open. On one side was the life I had almost accepted. Bellamy holidays, Bellamy rules, Bellamy apologies that never came, my parents always included just enough to prove they had not been excluded. On the other side was humiliation, gossip, financial uncertainty, legal complications, loneliness, maybe grief. But it was honest. It was mine. Lee appeared beside me without being called. "License is still unsigned," she whispered. I nodded. She put my small purse into my hand. "Whatever you do next, stand tall." I looked at table 17. My father was cutting his bread roll into pieces he was not eating. My mother was pretending to admire the flowers. I looked at table 2. Celeste was laughing. Adrian was drinking wine. Then I knew. I walked to table 17 and sat down between my parents. My mother blinked. "Nora, sweetheart, you're supposed to be at the sweetheart table." I said, "I am." My father turned toward me slowly. He knew. Fathers who have fixed engines for 3 decades learn to hear when something is about to break. "Don't do this because of us," he said quietly. I kissed his cheek. "I'm doing it because of what they think I'll tolerate." Lee caught my eye from across the room. I gave her the smallest nod. She nodded back. Then I stood. The distance from table 17 to the small stage was not far, but it felt like crossing from one life into another. My heels clicked on the hardwood. Conversations thinned as people noticed me moving without Adrian. Nolan was halfway through a story about the first time Adrian had driven a golf cart into a hedge at 16. He laughed into the microphone, then stopped when I reached him. "And here is our beautiful bride," he said, uncertain. There was scattered applause. I took the microphone gently from his hand. His fingers resisted for 1 second, then released. I looked out at the room. 180 people looked back. Some smiling, some puzzled, some already bracing because the body knows before the mind does when truth enters a room. Celeste sat perfectly upright at table 2. Adrian's glass was halfway to his mouth. Graham Bellamy stared at the centerpiece. My parents were behind me near the kitchen doors, and for the first time all day, I was between them and the people who had tried to diminish them. My voice came out steady. "Thank you all for coming today," I said. "I know many of you came to celebrate a marriage. Before this reception continues, I need to tell you why there will not be one." The silence that followed had weight. It pressed against the windows, the chandeliers, the white flowers. I continued. "This morning, the seating chart placed my parents, Eli and Marlene Hart, at the family table near the front of the room. That was the arrangement I approved. It mattered to me because they are not background characters in my life. They are the reason I am standing here." Heads began turning toward my parents. My mother lifted one hand to her mouth. My father sat very still. Sometime after that chart was approved, my parents were removed from the family table and placed at the last table in the room, beside the service entrance and the trash. They were not told. I was not told. Their names were also removed from the printed program. A low murmur spread through the room. Celeste's expression did not change, but her fingers tightened around her napkin. I said, "When I asked why, I learned that my fiancé's mother did not want a bus mechanic and a school cafeteria worker seated prominently in front of certain guests." Someone gasped. I did not look away from Celeste. "I also learned that my fiancé knew and agreed they were fine in the back." Adrian stood. "Nora, stop," he said. His voice cracked across the room, not loud enough to command, just loud enough to reveal fear. I turned toward him. "No. You asked me not to make a scene when your mother made one out of my parents' dignity. You had your chance to speak. This is mine." He remained standing for another second, then sat when Celeste tugged his sleeve. "I told them about my father. I told them how he rose at 4:30 for 34 years to keep city buses running before other people woke up. How he came home with swollen hands and still checked my math homework. How he saved for 6 months to buy the suit he was wearing. I told them about my mother, who fed hundreds of children every school day and slipped extra fruit onto trays when she knew a child was hungry. How she altered her own dress, not because she lacked taste, but because she had spent a lifetime making beauty out of what was available. I told them my parents had contributed $10,000 to the dinner being served. Every plate in this room, I said, was touched by their sacrifice before it was touched by a chef. People looked down at their food. Shame is often quiet at first. It arrives as eye contact breaking. Then I looked at Adrian. I wanted to marry a man who would protect the people who loved me before he ever did. I wanted to build a family with someone who understood that respect is not reserved for people with the right last name, the right clothes, or the right seat. Today I learned that if I sign that license, I am signing my parents into a lifetime of being tolerated instead of honored. I reached up and removed my veil. My hands did not shake. I folded it once and placed it on the edge of the stage. So I will not sign it. There is no marriage. There will be no Bellamy wife for your family to train into silence. The room broke open in whispers. One of my father's old co-workers stood first, then Rachel from the clinic, then my Aunt June, not clapping, not cheering, just standing, witnessing. Celeste rose slowly, her face pale beneath perfect makeup. "This is vulgar," she said, loud enough for half the room to hear. I turned back to the microphone. "No, Celeste. Vulgar is taking money from working people and seating them beside garbage because you think poverty is contagious." That sentence landed harder than I expected. Graham Bellamy closed his eyes. Adrian stared at me as if he had never seen me before. Maybe he had not. Maybe until that moment, he had only seen the version of me willing to wait until later. I stepped down from the stage and walked to my parents. My mother was crying silently. My father stood before I reached him. "Ready?" I asked. He nodded once. Lee was already there with my bag, my coat, and the paperwork folder she had quietly retrieved from the coordinator before anyone thought to stop her. The string ensemble had stopped playing. The servers stood frozen near the walls. We walked out together, my parents, Lee, and me. Behind us, Adrian called my name twice. The first time sounded angry. The second sounded afraid. I did not turn around. As the ballroom doors closed, I heard Celeste say, "She has destroyed herself." For the first time that day, she was wrong. That night, I sat at my parents' kitchen table in the dress I had not changed out of yet. My mother made tea nobody drank. My father removed his tie and folded it carefully beside his cup. For a long time, none of us spoke. The house sounded exactly as it always had. Refrigerator hum, clock tick, the occasional car passing outside. It seemed impossible that the world had shifted when the wallpaper in the kitchen was still peeling near the window. Lee called at 9:30. She had confirmed what she already knew. The license had not been signed, witnessed, or filed. Legally, I had never become Nora Bellamy. I was still Nora Hart. The relief that moved through me was not joy. It was oxygen. Adrian called 26 times before midnight. Then came the messages. First apology. "I panicked. Please let me explain." Then blame. "You humiliated my entire family." Then bargaining. "We can still fix this privately." Then threat. "You don't understand what you've done." I read none of them after the first few. Lee told me to preserve everything and respond to nothing. My mother sat beside me and brushed pins from my hair as if I were a child after a recital. My father stood at the sink washing 3 mugs by hand even though the dishwasher was empty. When he finished, he turned and said, "I was proud of you today." His voice broke on the word proud. That was the closest he came to crying. It was enough. For 3 weeks, I tried to let the story end there. It did not. Life rarely respects dramatic exits. 2 weeks after the wedding, I woke before dawn and vomited so hard I had to sit on the bathroom floor with my cheek against the tub. I told myself it was stress. By noon, I knew. By evening, a test from the pharmacy confirmed it. 2 pink lines. I was pregnant. I sat on the closed toilet lid holding the test like it was both a gift and a sentence. I had left the man. I had escaped the marriage. But there was now a child between our families, innocent and real, smaller than a seed and already powerful enough to redraw every boundary. I told my parents first. My mother cried and laughed at the same time. My father went outside, walked around the maple tree twice, came back in, and asked whether I needed ginger ale. That was how he processed becoming a grandfather under complicated circumstances, by solving nausea. I told Adrian by email because Lee insisted that documentation was safer than emotion. The message was brief. I am pregnant. I will continue the pregnancy. Any discussion of parental rights, medical information, or future arrangements must go through counsel. His response arrived in less than 10 minutes. "Come home, we can be a family." I stared at the word home and felt nothing. 4 hours later, a second message arrived. "If you try to keep my child from me, my family will respond accordingly." By midnight, a third. "You are making decisions out of anger and our child will suffer for it." 3 messages, 3 masks. Lover, opponent, victim. None of them was husband. None of them was father yet. Celeste tried calling my mother's house from a number we did not recognize. My father answered. I heard his side from the living room. "Yes, this is Eli." Silence. Then his jaw tightened. "No, Mrs. Bellamy, you will not discuss my daughter with me as if she is a misbehaving employee." More silence. "The baby is not an asset of Bellamy Properties." Then he hung up gently, which somehow felt more devastating than slamming the phone. He looked at me and said, "Lawyer." I nodded. That became our rule. Lawyer for Adrian. Silence for Celeste. Peace for the baby. The months that followed were not cinematic. They were paperwork, nausea, blood tests, court forms, work shifts, and waking at 3 in the morning wondering whether courage had an aftertaste of loneliness for everyone or just for me. Lee connected me with a family attorney named Dana Cho, a woman with sharp glasses and the calm of someone who had seen rich families mistake money for law many times. Dana told me Adrian had rights, but so did I. She told me Celeste had opinions, not rights. She told me judges cared about stability, caregiving, cooperation, and documentation, not pearl earrings. I saved every message. I attended every appointment. I kept working at the clinic until my ankles swelled so badly Rachel ordered me into a chair and threatened to chart me as non-compliant. Meanwhile, the Bellamys discovered that reputations are not owned. They are rented from everyone watching. I did not post about the wedding. I did not leak photos. I did not call donors or investors or board members. I did not have to. 180 people had seen enough. Within a month, Graham's development partner postponed a project pending reassessment. Celeste stepped down from the hospital gala committee for family reasons. Invitations slowed. People still smiled at her in public because that is what polite society does, but they stopped leaning close. They stopped handing her microphones. They stopped letting her decide who belonged in the center of the room. Her punishment was not exile. It was relevance slipping through manicured fingers. Adrian came to my parents' house once when I was 5 months pregnant. I watched from the upstairs window. He stood on the walkway holding flowers, looking younger than I remembered. My father opened the door but did not invite him inside. Adrian said he wanted to apologize. My father listened. Adrian said he had been under pressure. My father listened. Adrian said he loved me. My father said, "Love that needs permission from its mother is not ready to be trusted with a wife." Adrian's face hardened. There was the man from the messages, the one who appeared when charm failed. "You can't keep me away from my child," he said. My father nodded. "No one is trying to, but access to a child is not access to my daughter." Adrian left the flowers on the porch. My father threw them away before I could ask him to. I moved into a small apartment 6 blocks from my parents before the baby came. It had old beige carpet, a narrow kitchen, and a bedroom just big enough for a crib if I angled the dresser. My mother sewed curtains from yellow cotton with tiny white moons. My father installed shelves, repaired the bathroom fan, replaced a loose lock, and built a changing table from sanded pine because the ones online were, in his words, made of expensive cardboard. The apartment was not glamorous. It was mine. Every object in it felt like a vote for the life I had chosen. Lee came over on Sundays with groceries and legal updates. Rachel brought a second-hand rocking chair from her sister. My Aunt June dropped off casseroles labeled with reheating instructions so detailed they looked like medical protocols. I was not married. I was not alone. My daughter, Clara Marlene Hart, was born on a stormy Tuesday at 4:18 in the morning after 17 hours of labor and one moment, when I told the nurse I was leaving the hospital and would not be taking questions. She weighed 7 pounds, 1 ounce, and screamed with the outrage of someone who had been evicted without notice. My mother cut the cord because Adrian did not arrive in time, though he had been notified when I was admitted. My father held Clara after me and whispered, "Hello, little moon," which made no sense and immediately became her nickname. I gave her my last name, Hart, the name of a mechanic and a cafeteria worker, the name that had been removed from a wedding program but would not be removed from her. Adrian came to the hospital 6 hours later with Graham, not Celeste. He looked at Clara through the bassinet glass with an expression I could not read. Wonder, fear, regret, maybe all of it. Graham asked if he could see her, and because he had written me a letter weeks earlier taking responsibility for his silence, because he had not threatened me, because he had begun doing the one thing his family hated most, telling the truth about itself, I allowed him 5 minutes. He cried when Clara wrapped her fingers around one of his. Adrian watched him cry and looked away. I wondered then whether Adrian had ever been allowed to be soft without someone calling it weakness. The custody process was slow, tense, and less dramatic than Celeste probably wanted. Adrian was granted regular visitation once Clara was old enough for longer periods away from me. Communication went through a parenting app. Exchanges happened at a public family center for the first several months, then at my parents' house when Adrian proved he could be civil. Celeste demanded access through 3 different emotional channels and 1 legal one. Dana shut down all 4. The agreement required that any extended family visits occur only with Adrian present and with my prior knowledge. Celeste called that humiliating. I called it accurate. She did not meet Clara until Clara was almost 1, because Celeste could not bear a door she did not control. The first time Celeste saw my daughter, it was at a supervised birthday lunch in a public park. She arrived in white linen, carrying a gift bag from a boutique that sold baby sweaters no baby should be expected to keep clean. Clara was sitting on a blanket between my parents, chewing on a plastic ring shaped like a strawberry. Celeste approached slowly, as if cameras might be hidden in the trees. She said, "She has Bellamy eyes." My mother, without looking up from slicing strawberries, said, "She has her own eyes." I nearly laughed. My mother had found her voice somewhere between my wedding day and Clara's first birthday, and once she found it, she kept it polished. Celeste did not apologize. People like Celeste rarely apologize in the language they used to wound you. Instead, she said things like, "That day was unfortunate, and emotions were high, and I hope we can move forward for the child." I told her moving forward required knowing what we were moving from. She looked at me as if accountability were a dialect she refused to learn. So I did not force closeness. I did not stage forgiveness for the comfort of people who missed access more than they regretted harm. Clara deserved peace more than she deserved a grandmother's unchecked pride. A year after the wedding that never became a marriage, my life looked nothing like the one I had planned, and more like the one I could actually breathe inside. I was back full-time at the clinic, promoted to lead pediatric nurse, which meant a small raise, more responsibility, and a key to the medication cabinet that made my father more impressed than any Bellamy Gala invitation ever had. Clara had curls at the back of her head, my smile, Adrian's chin, and a laugh that sounded like hiccups in a glass jar. My apartment still had beige carpet. The bathroom fan still rattled, though less since my father tightened something inside it. The changing table he built had tiny teeth marks along one rail because Clara believed all furniture was a snack. It was not the life Celeste would have chosen for a Bellamy child. That was one of its finest qualities. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became the center of our week. No seating chart, no place cards, no crystal. Just the old kitchen table with mismatched chairs, my mother's roasted chicken or spaghetti, my father's iced tea, Lee dropping in after court, Rachel bringing pie and pretending she had accidentally baked too much again. Clara sat in a high chair between my parents like a tiny queen presiding over peas. My father made ridiculous engine noises to get her to eat carrots. My mother tucked a dish towel around Clara's neck like a royal bib. Sometimes, when the light hit the kitchen window just right, I thought about the ballroom, the chandeliers, the flowers, the table by the trash. Then I looked at my parents laughing as Clara smashed potatoes into her hair, and I understood something I wish I had known sooner. The front of the room is not always where honor lives. Sometimes honor sits at an old kitchen table under a buzzing light, with people who would never move you farther away to impress someone else. Adrian changed in small ways after Clara was born. Not enough to rewrite the past, but enough for me to notice. He arrived on time for pickups. He learned how to buckle the car seat after I made him practice 3 times in the driveway. He stopped sending emotional messages and stuck to logistics. Once, when Clara had a fever, he came to the clinic parking lot with infant Tylenol, diapers, and a stuffed rabbit because the app message said she had been crying. He handed them to me without trying to come inside. "I didn't know what she needed," he said, "so I brought what I could." That was the first time I saw him do something useful without making it about himself. It did not make me want him back. It made me hope Clara might have a father who could grow beyond the man who failed me. Graham became a quiet presence at the edges. He wrote on Clara's birthday. He sent savings bonds instead of extravagant gifts. He asked permission before visiting. The first time my father allowed him into the house, they sat on the porch for 40 minutes discussing engines, weather, and the moral failure of plastic plumbing parts. Neither mentioned the wedding. They did not need to. Some apologies are not sentences. Some are repeated acts of standing where you should have stood the first time. As for Celeste, she remained Celeste. Softer in public, perhaps, more careful. But careful is not the same as kind. She never again held a committee chair with the same authority. People remembered. Not with pitchforks, not with public scandal, but with that small pause before accepting her invitations. Her world had not collapsed. It had adjusted. Mine had too. The difference was that my adjustment made room for truth, and hers made room for consequences. People sometimes ask whether I regret making the speech. They ask if I could have handled it privately, if I embarrassed myself, if I should have thought about the baby I did not yet know I was carrying. Here is my answer. Privacy protects mistakes. It should not be used to shelter patterns of cruelty. I did think about my future child, though I did not know her name yet. I thought about the lesson being written in that ballroom. I thought about a daughter watching her mother smile through disrespect to keep a man comfortable. I thought about what children inherit when silence is mistaken for grace. Walking out did not make my life easy. It made it honest. Easy and honest are not always the same road. I chose the one where I could look my daughter in the eye. I am 30 now. I am a nurse, a mother, a daughter, a woman who left a wedding reception before dessert and somehow found herself afterward. My father still fixes things even when no one asks. My mother still feeds people as if hunger is a personal enemy. Clara still throws spoons on the floor with revolutionary conviction. Our table is scratched, crowded, and imperfect. Nobody sitting at it has a title impressive enough for Celeste Bellamy's programs. Nobody needs one. Every chair is offered with love. Every person belongs without audition. Maybe you have a table 17 in your life. Maybe it is not a wedding table. Maybe it is a family gathering where your partner lets someone mock your accent, your job, your parents, your past. Maybe it is a workplace where you are invited but never included. Maybe it is a relationship where you keep being told to wait until later for the respect that should have been present from the beginning. I cannot tell you when to stand. I cannot tell you what leaving will cost. I can only tell you what staying was about to cost me. It was going to cost me my voice, then my parents' dignity, then my daughter's inheritance of self-worth. That price was too high. The man I almost married did not lose me because his mother moved 2 place cards. He lost me because when the moment came to choose between love and status, he called status peace. His mother did not expose my family as lesser. She exposed her own measure of worth. My parents walked out of that ballroom with me, past chandeliers and champagne and people who suddenly understood what money cannot buy. They walked out with their heads high. And later, when my daughter was old enough to sit in my father's lap and steal mashed potatoes from his plate, I realized we had not left the family table that day. We had finally found it. So if you are listening to this while sitting somewhere you were made to feel barely tolerated, I hope you remember Eli and Marlene Hart at table 17. I hope you remember that a chair beside the trash is not a blessing just because someone powerful offered it. I hope you remember that the people who love you should not require you to shrink the people who raised you. And I hope, when the time comes, you stand up before the pen touches the paper. That was my story. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their family, their dignity, and their past are not things to hide in the back of the room. Leave a comment and tell me what you would have done if you were standing in my place. Subscribe to After Silence Stories for more stories like this. and I'll see you in the next episode.